Well, here we are today. Low Oxygen Brewing Podcast number one. I guess we'll call it the origin stories. I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit about me and how we all came about and how that all works. So, I started brewing in the early 2000s. My dad got a Mr. Beer kit from a friend of his. My dad is the exact opposite of a brewer. In fact, he only drinks one beer, and it's a light American lager, and he's quite a diva about it. If the bars don't carry it, he will literally drink water instead. So he was given this gift, and he wasn't going to use it. Me being me, I was an inquisitive lad, and I thought, what the heck? So I'll never forget taking out the ingredients, laying them out on the counter, and trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. I remember smelling hops for the first time, and for some reason I thought they were poisonous, or not really poisonous, but something that had to be boiled first, so I shouldn't really smell them. You know, early, early, uh, late teenager, we'll call it, early 20s. And didn't really have an understanding, didn't really like beer myself. However, I made that first batch on the stove, and it was actually quite interesting. I don't know, it made beer. I watched it as you do with the Mr. Beer. I bottled it and proceeded to try and drink it. And it was all right. But the process is really what I love the most. Crafting something from scratch. And so I remember I was going to school still, and I was working cleaning a restaurant in the mornings before school. And I remember talking to one of the bartenders there and told him that I was making my own beer. To which he replied, "Oh yeah, I do that too." Um, and he asked what beers I liked, and I basically said, your standard American light lagers. And so he gave me some beers to try to go pick up from the liquor store. So I went out and I bought Anchor Steam. Anchor Steam was the first real craft beer I ever tasted. And I remember tasting it and thought it was vile. It was just not what I knew beer to taste like. There was, I think, some Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Could not drink that either. It was just a whole lot of everything too much for me. Um, but there was another kit that came with the Mr. Beer, and it was, I believe, an American wheat beer kit. And my dad has my parents have a very nice garden, and my dad's been growing raspberries there for as long as I can remember. And every year he gets this bountiful harvest of blackberries and red raspberries. So that year it happened to be around the same time, and I remember um, getting some of the red raspberries and adding them to the beer, and it was actually a really nice beer for what it was. And there was a party, and I remember serving it in 2 liter pop bottles, and the girls really seemed to like it, and I thought it was good too. So that's basically what spawned my brewing. And so soon after that, I went to Midwest Supplies and kind of splurged on a kit, which was like your standard extract kit, your bucket, your fermenters, um, brewed a batch of Irish Red, and that was a really nice beer. And then I came back and said, these are nice beers and whatnot, but I really think that I want to make a light lager. And they said, that's pretty advanced. You're going to need all this other stuff and whatnot. And I said, okay. So I got it. I got a fridge controller and the whole nine, and I started making lager beer. And that was after my second batch of beer. Well, fourth, really, because I had two Mr. Beer kits that I did, the one Irish Red, and then it was light lagers and lagers from there on out. So, there was a lot of beer. I made a lot of beer. What I found out right away is that the stovetop was not where I wanted to be at. The all grain was much more intriguing to me. And because I'm a process guy and a engineering guy, the more control of the levers, the better. And so what I did is brewed, I think, one batch all grain with a turkey fryer and a pot and a cooler. And it took me one time to realize that this was way too hands-on. And so I built my first system. My first system was a 3-vessel single tier. I built that right around probably 2006, roughly guessing. And I built a wooden frame, put that in there. Right away went electric. I had a cooler mash tun in the center of the tier, and then I had one pump, and that would allow me to. I built a manifold where all the wort could come to, and I could pump in different directions. Manual ball valves, but electric in that, and a pump, and I found that was fun. And then we ended up moving to another house. And in that other house, there was a utility room. And that utility room was definitely calling my name. The old house I brewed in the garage, and everything was in the garage. So in the winter, it was just a bear. We're in Minnesota, so you're talking about frozen hoses and all sorts of not fun stuff to deal with. So the new house, moved in, and got the basement finished, and with that came the brew room. Basically, I encased the water heater and the furnace behind some bifold doors. Built a little nook for a keezer back in one corner, and piped those taps out to the main living room from there. And then the rest of the room now was wide open for my brewing system. And I built a 2-vessel brewing system based on the brew troller. First, it was actually BCS. Based on the BCS system, I for the life of me can't remember his name who created it. I want to say Adam, but I don't know if that's right. He was from Rochester, Minnesota, and we got together, and I really liked that system. I could operate it with the touchscreen and all that fun stuff, and that really played to what I like to do. Due to not being able to do some stuff, I switched over to the brew troller, and then I built my 2-vessel system based on Blickman kettles. That was all hard piped and everything, and it was actually featured in the New York Times among some other BYO and Zymergy, I think. And so that system, I brewed a lot of beers on that system, a lot of beers, and we lived at that house for probably 5 to 7 years, and brewed quite a bit. Moved to this current location in 2014, and I built this house. And in designing the blueprints for this house, I put a brewery in the basement, as you can see behind me, behind glass. And eventually, when I get the basement all finished, there'll be a bar and seating around the bar, and so you can look at the brewery through the glass. And so that was the mindset. I knew I was going to brew. I knew I wanted to rebuild my system, and so that's what came of it. And I brewed. I pretty much started brewing lager beer, um, like from that fourth batch on, and really tried to perfect it. Um, I lost. I don't have the count in front of me, but I'm probably at 1,500 beers or 1,500 batches of beer at this point in my life, between 5 gallon, 10 gallon, 1 barrel, 3 barrel, 7 barrel, 10 barrel. Helped a lot of breweries around here with process and stuff like that. Um, and I brewed a lot of beer. But lager beer has always been my favorite and kind of my white whale. And why I say it was my white whale is because I could produce it, and it was good. I mean, it was fine. I won a lot of medals with it, and you know, it was fine. But to me, there was always something missing. It was this something I couldn't get, and it was very prevalent in the German continental beers. And so it it haunted me for a long time, you know. Uh 15 years. No, not that many. At least 10 to 12. And so that brings us to getting together with a group on Facebook called German Brewing. Now, the German Brewing Facebook group was for people who liked German beers. Um, it was homebrewers. It was just normal folks who went to Germany or who were connoisseurs of German beer. And so I really, really, really liked that place, and loved to see all the German beers and the people going to Germany and all that stuff. So some other background that I left out was that my grandma was born and raised in Salzburg, Austria. And so I do have German roots, albeit Austrian. And I've always had this, I don't know, something that really has drawn me to that region and those beers. And so when I joined that group, a lot of people would post pictures of their beer and stuff like that. So I posted some pictures of my beer and found that people liked it, and we would get to talking. Well, the creator of the site, his name was Brandon. Brandon and I began to talk and decided at one point to exchange beers. He was a home brewer. I was a home brewer. He was over in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia or somewhere over there. And so we exchanged beers. I was really excited because Brandon goes to Germany quite a bit. His wife is from Germany. And so he knows or knows German beer. And so I was really excited to switch beers with him, and so we switched beers and um, tasted each other's beers, and his beers tasted like mine tasted like his. They were good, but we both agreed that they were missing something. Um, we he kind of coined the phrase it. So it was missing it. What is it? It really wasn't, it is hard to be defined. It is, I don't know, probably a fresh malt character, a good fermentation character, slight sulfur, just a beautiful, rounded, flawless beer. That's it. And so we would go back and forth over theories and have discussions about it and how to create it. Was it decoction? Was it grains? Was it a freshness of grains that we couldn't get here? Was it hops? Was it scale? Was it size? Was what was it? And so we had many discussions about it. And as we were having these discussions, more people seemed interested and understood what we were talking about, albeit we really didn't have a definition ourselves. And so this it, people understood that there was this something in these beers that you couldn't really get over here. And even in beers from Germany that were shipped here, they lost a lot of it. And in beers made here, there was no it. And so that led us to create a little subgroup out of the German brewing group, which was handful of members. It was Brandon, myself, a gentleman by the name of Steve, a gentleman by the name of Nico, and Nico was a Munich transplant to the London area and still has had family and whatnot over there. So he was very in tune with it and what potentially it was. Then there was another gentleman by the name of Dave, and then we brought in another local to me, Kit, and then ultimately we brought in a couple more people, Russ and CT. And so that it really started out though with the core of about five of us. The core was Brandon, myself, Nico, Steve, Dave, and I think that's five. And so what we really started to do is deep dive into all the different thoughts, processes, what we thought it could be, and try a whole bunch of stuff. And we tried, my system was basically the guinea pig or the test system, the pilot system as it were. My system was the most repeatable and consistent because at that point it was still controlled by BrewTroller, which uses a Arduino microcontroller. And so you can achieve a decent level of precision with that. And so whenever we try something new, we'd always try it here on the system. And so we tried everything known to man, all these methods, every mashing method, decoction, single infusion, step mashing. Albeit I was already doing the step mashing and brewing a lot of German lagers anyways, so that was all familiar to me. We tried different water, different salts, different malts, different hops, aged hops, fresh hops. We tried different fermentation schedules, different carbonation schedules, Spies, Krausen. We tried everything. And nothing could get us there. And nothing could produce it. And so we were at a loss. And one day we happened to be brewing And we're all watching it, and um, we tried a method where we doughed in really low at like 95 degrees or something for an acid rest. And so during that process, what happened was my pump started sucking in air. And my straw colored wort, which was a light straw color, went from straw to deep orange with all the air that was being pumped through. And so I watched this with my own eyes, through the sight glass. And I remember commenting about it, and I said, geez, I just watched this stuff go dark, and the flavor changed. The flavor went from more a raw grain flavor to sweet and no grain flavor. And Dave, who is a scientist, Dave said, huh. And we all thought on it for the night. And Dave came back the next day and he goes, what about oxidation? And so we all said, well, HSA, hot side aeration, has basically been debunked. And I don't, I don't know. And he said, well, I mean, how is it any different than, slicing an apple and setting it on the counter, or slicing an avocado, or anything like that? The interaction between air and the fruit, or the malt, or the raw material, we'll call it, um, has an effect. And what we know about chemistry and what we know about science is that heat accelerates the molecules, which accelerates the effects. And so what we started to really think about at that point was oxidation, and on the hot side. And we thought about it, like, how can we mitigate it? How can we even start? I mean, this is a losing battle on any front. For one, the scale. Our pots are short and fat, whereas professional brewing systems are tall and narrow comparatively. Professional brewing systems are enclosed. Ours are wide open. And so once we started to think about this and kind of put two and two together, it started to make sense. Now, we started to then research and look into some professional literature, like this book, Technology, Malting and Brewing by Coons, Dieberry, Die Beer Brewery Band 2 from Narses. And we found some really interesting things. Namely, you can't go more than a couple pages without seeing oxygen mentioned and how it's bad. From strike water to mashing to doughing in to boiling to cooling, all sorts of oxygen. I mean, it was like these books were tailored to exactly what we were kind of fighting, not really fighting, but discussing amongst ourselves about, well, is it oxygen? How could it be oxygen? And all that fun stuff. So knowing is only half the battle. And so, okay, so maybe it is oxygen, maybe it is hot side. Um, but where do we go from here? How do we even start? And so the first thing we did the next time I brewed, was pre-boiled and cooled as fast as I could the strike water. So what we noticed and what was real interesting was that when I did that, the mash was way lighter in color, SRM value wise, and it wasn't it didn't have an orange hue to it, like a burnt orange hue, like an apple that you slice sitting on the counter. That white flesh goes to that brown hue. And and what we found was by just deoxygenating that strike water, it changed the hue to a pale yellow instead of that brownish hue. And so, what was really interesting about that then was that all of a sudden it was there. And it was this fresh grain taste. And it was unlike anything I've ever tasted as far as wort goes ever before. And so it was quite the revelation. It was super fun, super interesting. However, by the end of mashing, it went away. So here's what starts the process of creating, which is not really creating. We soon found out. We thought it was something was creating it, but at the end of the day, nothing is creating it. We are saving it. And so we went down this path of trying to create it, only to have it slip away in different parts of the process. And so in our deoxygenated mash only, it was there in the beginning and then it was gone. So at least there was something. So that kind of set us down this path of, okay, maybe it is oxygen, but how can we keep oxygen out? I mean, we live in oxygen. And so then there was thoughts of capping the vessels, purging the vessels, using antioxidants such as potassium or sodium metabisulfate, ascorbic acid, which is also an antioxidant. And so that kind of took us down this path of many dozens and dozens of brews of having it and losing it all throughout the brewing process. So what that culminated to was a process that we knew would guarantee it lasting at least through the hot side. We ran into our own set of issues losing it on the cold side. And that went from fermenting warm, not pitching enough yeast, healthy yeast, forced carbonation, improper purging of kegs and vessels. And so we finally, after probably 100 plus batches of beer, I was able to go from start to finish and create a beer with it through a process with steps and procedures. Those steps and those procedures culminated to a paper in April 2014 that's called On Brewing Bavarian Helles. Now that paper was written as a surefire 100% way to create a beer with it. Now, all of a sudden, we're creating beers that taste like the commercial counterparts of Europe, fresh counterparts of the beers in Europe. Now, what we found out is that the small brewer American way of making beer was damaging the malt antioxidants and polyphenols, which was then causing them to evaporate and not be in the beer, which is why probably 99% of the beer created in the United States does not have this character. It is a method and a procedure that needs to be followed in order for that beer to have this character. And so we figured that out. And really, all the professional literature confirmed and basically is saying the same thing. And minus the antioxidants, it's debatable. I don't really know what side of the fence I'm on, but the Germans have the Reinheitsgebot, and that basically states that technically they can't add things to beer that they can't take out, which basically means you can't add anything other than barley unless it's an ale. So if it's a lager beer, it has to, have all 100% barley, and no wheat malts or any adjuncts like that, and some other interesting things. But the German brewers, the Reinheitsgebot's been around since 1516, and the Germans are smart folks. The Germans have been brewing a long time. The Germans know how to make pale lagers the best there is. I'll say that. And I don't know that any of these large macro professional brewers are using antioxidants, but if they were, we would never know. And there'd be no way for us to tell, because the antioxidants are used up at the time of oxygenating the wort at pitching, and once that happens, they're gone. There's no way to track it. Much like the German brewers can add PVPP for fining and remove it with a filter, and that's fine. So I'll debate that. I don't, like I said, I don't know what side of the fence I'm actually on. I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know if they do or they don't. But if they did, we would never know. And if they don't, they don't. And so once we figured out these antioxidants will help, these potassium and sodium metabisulfites and this ascorbic acid, they react with oxygen in water, and when they break down, after they oxidize, they break down to either potassium and sulfate or sodium and sulfate, and they're harmless. It basically just adds to your water chemistry. And so the antioxidants were always were and are a hack for a home brewer to allow us super low DO water and process without having a professional system, because most home brewers don't. And it was actually brought forth by Dave, and it was ingenious. It's an ingenious method. A lot of people get really upset about that, and they use that as this as their fight subject. Like, professional brewers don't use antioxidants. Okay. And so that's losing the forest for the trees, though. It's a minuscule deal in the grand scheme of things. And so what we were finding out was that with these antioxidants, with capping our vessels, with pumping gently, boiling gently, basically mirroring what the professional brewers are doing, we were creating beers that were much, much more world-class examples of the style. And so when that paper came out in 2014, that was 100% guaranteed way to create a beer like a Munich Helles that you would get in Munich from Paulaner, from Augustiner, from Spaten, from Einger, anyone like that. All these brewers there have been brewing a long time. They're on state-of-the-art professional brewing systems, and they know what the hell they're doing. They've known oxygen on the hot side is bad for their product since, God, I'm pretty sure I've seen early 1900s professional brewing literature saying the same thing. So I know for sure since the 70s, since the early 70s, there's been papers and journals about hot side aeration. And so the paper came out, and it was immediately the paper came out and it was immediately greeted with nothing but backlash. And which was really interesting. It's a really interesting people study. There's a lot of information in not only just the brewing community, but in life as a whole that is antiquated and outdated. Now, a lot of people have hung their hats on certain methods and procedures, and again, I'm not just talking about brewing, I'm talking about life in general, that are rooted in times where it may have been correct, but times change, technology advances, science advances, and once you're able to reproduce things and test them and verify them, you have two options. And this is the people study, really. You have two options. You believe and you change, or you don't. And to me personally, I don't care which one it is. And that's not just in brewing, that's in life as well. You can believe in change or you don't. And so a lot of people didn't. And that is completely fine. In fact, a lot of the beers made in the world aren't made low oxygen. Now, that's not to say that making them low oxygen would make them worse, but the stylistic characters of these beers are made by process. So your American IPA, there's not a lot of malt backbone, it's hops. And you could certainly brew it low oxygen and you could add that malt backbone in and you would find you maybe like that. You would find maybe you don't like that. But the fact of the matter is that the beers today, most of the beers produced in the United States taste like beers made in the United States. And that's because most of the beers in the United States are made like beers in the United States. Single infusion, small craft brewers who are once home brewers, and I'm not knocking on that in any shape or form. But you'll find that generally more of the European brewers have been schooled, have professional degrees in brewing, and the beers made in Europe taste like beers made in Europe. And why is that? Because they're beers made with the process and procedures of people from Europe. And so it transcends more than beer. Look at a steak. Look at a steak in Europe versus steak in the United States versus steak in Mexico. All these different steaks and meats are gonna taste different. And why do they taste different? Because the animals are eating different foods. They're handled differently. It's different methods and different processes. They're all cooked, but maybe one cooks it over a griddle and one cooks it over hardwood charcoal and one cooks it in an oven. So the the home brewers, a lot of the home brewers were really upset when that paper came out, which is foolish because nowhere did it say that that was the way to brew all beers. Now, I will say that I don't brew a beer that isn't low oxygen because I prefer the beers brewed low oxygen. But that's not to say that you can't make a decent beer. And no one ever said that. No one ever said that. And so there was a lot of animosity over this paper. And the paper was solely about brewing Bavarian Helles. Why someone would think that you can take a beer brewed in Germany by the professional brewers on their professional systems and hack together, I'm sorry, I won't use that word, and put together a beer that's brewed by American methods and call it a Helles. It doesn't, it's like you taking that Mexican beef and telling me it's an American steak. It is not. No way, shape, or form. And so I think that was the biggest beef. But I don't understand why it was the beef because it's the truth. You can't create beers. You can't clone beers, period. But you can't try and clone a beer when you don't follow the same process and methods. It just doesn't work. The whole reason that beer is the way it is because of said processes and procedures. That's just how it works. And it's not even beer, it's food, it's whatever it may be. And so once that paper came out and you had your different camps, and you had your camps of people who would try it and either see results. Well, if you tried it and you followed it, you would see a result. Whether you like that result or don't, that is really the only debate. The debate is not, is it different? Because it is. It's 110% different. It's a different process and it's a different procedure. It's going to yield a different result. That's just the way it goes. So the debate should never have been, is this different? Because it is. The debate should be, is this flavor something I like or not? Which is purely subjective. But at the bottom of it, it's going to create a different product. So this is created, and people try it, people don't try it. Again, this is April 2014, and I'm sorry, not April 2014. 2014 is when the group was created. 2016, April of 2016 is when that paper was released. 2014 is when that group, the small core group was founded, and we started the process of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, or dozens and dozens and dozens of batches. And so the paper was disseminated, Take it or leave it, love it or hate it. The overall was hate it. And I'll admit that paper was strongly worded, but I almost think it had to be. And I go back and forth on this too. Could it have been a more um dude, try it this way. Yeah, it could have been. But that's not us. And that's not the to be frank, that's not the group we're after. The group of people we're after read that paper, didn't get offended because it wasn't offending, listened, learned, tried it, or didn't believe, researched, and tried it. And we want those people, and not that this is a cult or not that this should even be a divide, it's just a different brewing process. That's all it is. And so, but in order to get this brewing process, you have to be, in general, a more trying to find the right word, disciplined brewer. And you have to incorporate science and understand. And I know, right? I understand. A lot of people do this as a hobby, and a lot of people don't want to do all that. And that's cool. That's totally cool. No one's making you do anything you don't want to do. And so, but the people who seem to embrace this and excel are the more technical oriented people and that are doing this for more than just a hobby. Like, it's still a hobby, but they take it very seriously, and which is exactly the same person I am. I take my brewing very seriously. I hold my beers up to the commercial examples, and when they fall short, that's a failure. And yeah, it might be fine to drink and all that fun stuff, but I failed, and I'm going to try again until I get it right. And so the paper comes out. The paper actually, due to all the friction the paper caused, it caused friction amongst the group. And so it basically divided the group into two camps. And that was the last of the group, as it were. It basically split down the middle, and some of us went one way and some of us went the other way. In hindsight, it was all foolish and stupid, and I'm sure if we could, we would all put our egos aside and just let it be. And so, but that changed the course, as it were, for low oxygen brewing and low oxygen tactics. And so myself and some others went off and created our own website, which is lowoxygenbrewing.com, which is why we're here today. And we basically took a lot of the ideas from the original paper and distilled them down and tried to make them easier to follow for the masses. With the feedback and the kickback we got from the original paper, in order for people to actually try this, we felt we really had to dial it back and take it down a peg or two on the technical side. Not to say that it's not still technical, it is, but at least we feel it's more approachable. And being more approachable is good. Because at the end of the day, low oxygen brewing and everything it all is was created in order to find other like-minded people to push the envelope further. Now, what I mean by that is I didn't really start the website to help people. I did, but in a different way you might think. I created the website to find like-minded people to further the methods and the procedures. I didn't start the website to help people, period. If that makes any sense. What I'm trying to get out is I wanted something back, and I wanted someone else to pass the torch to, as it were, or people to pass the torch to, because I've been fighting the good fight since 2014, and things are finally starting now to turn around, and people are understanding, and people are stepping back and realizing that this is valid. It's just a different thing. I mean, there's still tons of kickback and still, which is sad to see, because 98% of it is funded, is backed by dogma and no scientific fact or reason. And all we do is put forth scientific fact and reason. And it's just a weird deal. But where I was going with that was, where was I going with that? When we started the site, the paper Methods of a Low Oxygen Brew House it's a solid work. It tells you what you need to know, with no contention, no bias. Just if you want to try it, try it. And you can try it or not try it. At the end of the day, you'll like it or you won't. And I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to push anything. I'm here to talk about the facts, talk about what it is, how it is, and the like. So I think this is a pretty good spot to stop the background, because we're pretty much at current day now with the Methods of a Low Oxygen Brew House, the background of me and where I came from in the brewing world. So I think what I'll do is I'll kind of discuss where I think I want this to go. So it's going to be a more long form discussion. I've already talked for about an hour just on the background. Whereas when I've been on podcasts and obviously I'm not going to type this in a forum post or online long form like this. It's impossible. So I want to use this podcast as more of a long form information delivery. And so like I said, this was the first podcast. We spent an hour talking about the background of me and where we came from and how we did it. Since this is podcast 01, I think what I'm going to do going forward is ask social media, whether it be Facebook, the forums, Instagram, Twitter, etc., if they have any questions that are pertaining to the subject. And then what we'll do is I'll get a list of questions, and then at the end of the segment, I'll read off the questions and answer them. To be honest, I don't post on forums much. I'm kind of over it, for the last basically 6 years. I've been saying the same shit over and over and over and over. And to be honest, I'm kind of tired of it. So I don't post much on the forums. But I love to answer questions, and I love to help people out. So basically what I foresee for this podcast is Podcast 02 is going to be on the paper, Methods of a Low Oxygen Brew House. We're going to go over the paper. We're going to discuss it. I might kind of dive off a little into some other subjects, but if you read the paper online at lowoxygenbrewing.com, you'll notice that there's hyperlinks inside there, and I'm going to not go off probably on those hyperlinks when we talk about the paper, but I want to basically cover everything that we have in the blog in a long form like this, and really talk about it, and then answer questions pertaining to those different topics. And so we have a bunch of different topics on the blog, from lager fermentation to carbonation to CO2 purity to sour gut and boiling and mashing and everything. So I think the podcast could really benefit from more long form about it. And so I think that's really where I want to go with this. I don't know how long they're going to be. I'm not going to put a time frame on it. But I'll try and do them when I can do them, when I have time, probably on the weekends, early morning, a Saturday, Sunday or something like that, when the kids are in bed and the house is quiet. And we'll talk about it. And we'll get some questions and we'll answer some questions and go from there and see where it goes. So, with that said, I think this will be it for podcast 01, which is background on myself and Low Oxygen Brewing. And on the next one, we will probably discuss Methods of a Low Oxygen Brew House, which is the paper, and how that was written and ended up in BYO and being featured in some other places, which is really cool. Big shout out to Derek Scott, who is my partner in crime on all this as well. He helps with all the low oxygen brewing stuff on the website, and is a great dude. So we will probably just cut this off now, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Later.